December 22, 1944. 14:47 hours, 6 kilometers south of Bastogne. General Major Heinz Kockott raised his binoculars with trembling hands. What he saw through the swirling snow would haunt him for the rest of his life, not because it was terrifying, but because it was impossible. Dozens of American Sherman tanks, rolling north in column formation, coming straight for him. But here's what made Kockott's blood run cold: these tanks shouldn't exist. Not here. Not now. According to every German calculation, every logistics model, every principle of armored warfare learned over 2 decades. They were 100 miles away. How had an entire American armored division covered that distance in just 48 hours? Let me take you back 4 days. December 16, 1944. German Army Group B headquarters. Field Marshal Walter Model stood over a map, his finger pressed against a single town, Bastogne. 7 roads converged at this junction, the only routes through the Ardennes forest capable of supporting armored columns in the dead of winter. Model's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Punch through thinly stretched American lines. Capture Bastogne within 48 hours. Then race west to Antwerp, splitting the Allied armies in 2 and forcing negotiations before American factories could bury Germany under an avalanche of steel. Timeline was everything. Days 1-2, shatter American defenses, encircle Bastogne. Days 3-5, capture the town, control the road network. Days 6-10, rush to the Meuse River before reinforcements arrive. Model's intelligence staff had done the math. Moving an American armored division from the south would take 7 to 10 days minimum. German horse-drawn logistics required that much time. American motorized logistics, despite their trucks, should require roughly the same through winter roads. But Model's planners made one catastrophic assumption. They believed American logistics operated under the same physical laws as their own. By December 20th, day 4, the plan was unraveling. Bastogne hadn't fallen. The 101st Airborne Division, surrounded and outnumbered 4-1, still held the town in an iron grip. German forces controlled everything around Bastogne but couldn't break through. Model's carefully calculated timeline was collapsing like a house of cards. And if American armor arrived before Bastogne fell, the entire offensive would grind to a halt. Those 7 roads would stay in American hands. German panzer divisions would be trapped in the forest, sitting ducks once Allied air power returned. On December 21st, Kockott received orders that would seal his fate. Capture Bastogne within 24 hours. American reinforcements approaching from the south. Take the town before they arrive. Kockott calculated the distance. Patton's 4th Armored Division, 100 miles south. 7 days minimum. He had time. Or did he? December 20th, 1944. 11:30 hours, 8 kilometers south of Bastogne. Oberleutnant Klaus Weber crouched in a snow-filled foxhole, binoculars pressed to his face. His orders: report any American movement from the south. At 11:47, Weber spotted the first column, 12 Sherman tanks, moving north at 15 kilometers per hour. He radioed headquarters. American armor advancing, estimate 1 company, engaging. Weber's position commanded 675 anti-tank guns, perfectly positioned for a textbook ambush. The doctrine was simple: let the lead tanks pass, destroy the middle vehicles, trap the column, eliminate it piece by piece. At 12:03, Weber's guns erupted. 2 Shermans exploded in orange fireballs. The column halted. American infantry dismounted, beginning their flanking movements. Weber smiled. This was going exactly as planned. The Americans would pause, call for artillery, wait for reinforcements. This would buy them hours, maybe until nightfall. But then at 12:11, just 8 minutes after the ambush began, Weber heard something that defied all tactical logic. The surviving American tanks were moving again, not retreating, not waiting for support. They were driving around his position, cross-country, through snow-covered fields, leaving their burning tanks behind like discarded cigarette butts. Weber grabbed his radio, voice urgent. "Sir, the Americans aren't stopping. They're bypassing our position entirely." His company commander's response dripped with disbelief. "Impossible. No armored force abandons disabled vehicles without recovery operations. They'll return." But Weber watched through his binoculars as the American column vanished over the northern ridge. They weren't coming back. They had traded 2 tanks for 8 minutes and considered it a bargain. 12:45 hours. Weber saw the second column, 20 tanks. He didn't even bother engaging. His guns could destroy 3, maybe 4. The rest would simply bypass and continue north. 13:20 hours, 3rd column, 18 tanks. 14:05 hours, 4th column, 24 tanks. At 14:30, Weber's voice crackled over the radio, tight with frustration. "Sir, they're not stopping. We've counted 74 tanks in 3 hours. They move in continuous waves. Every time we engage, they bypass and keep coming. We're not delaying them. We're just counting them as they pass. Long silence on the radio. Then, understood, fall back to secondary positions, conserve ammunition. Weber understood what that meant. Headquarters had realized the truth. The Americans weren't fighting for territory. They were racing against time itself. As Weber's squad retreated through the snow, he glanced back at the road. Another American column was already visible on the southern horizon. They just kept coming. But here's what terrified German commanders even more than the speed of the American advance. The Americans weren't just moving fast. They were moving impossibly. How were they sustaining this pace without running out of fuel? December 21st, 1944. 14:00 hours. German Intelligence Headquarters. Oberstleutnant Heinrich von Leutwitz, Chief of Staff for the 47th Panzer Corps, stared at reconnaissance reports that made his head spin. His aide placed a folder on the desk. "Sir, aerial reconnaissance confirms American armor is advancing without establishing fuel dumps." Von Leutwitz opened the folder, his eyes scanning the impossible data. German panzer divisions required fixed fuel depots every 50 kilometers. Each depot took 48 hours to establish and needed 200 tons of fuel transported by horse-drawn wagons or captured trucks. This created a predictable, targetable supply chain. The Americans had no depots. Their fuel moved with the tanks. "Explain to me," von Leutwitz demanded, "how the Americans are sustaining this advance without fuel stations." His logistics officer handed him another report. "Sir, we've identified their system. 240 GMC trucks, each carrying 800 gallons of gasoline in portable bladders." The system was brilliant in its simplicity. 80 trucks refueling forward units, 80 returning south for resupply, 80 in transit between positions, refueling time per Sherman, 8 minutes. Von Leutwitz grabbed his notepad and did the mathematics. 240 trucks times 800 gallons equals 192,000 gallons delivered per day. Enough to move 400 Sherman tanks 100 kilometers. By comparison, German logistics delivered 250,000 liters per week via horse-drawn wagons. He looked up at his officer, the color draining from his face. "They're delivering in one day what takes us an entire week, and they're doing it while moving at full combat speed." But fuel was only the beginning. At 15:30 hours, von Leutwitz received another report that shattered reality even further. "Sir, the Americans have crossed the Sura River at Martelange." Von Leutwitz checked his watch. "Impossible. Our engineers destroyed that bridge at 15:30. He paused, calculating. "That was 45 minutes ago." His officer placed aerial reconnaissance photos on the desk. "Sir, the Americans built a new bridge. It's already operational." Von Leutwitz studied the photos. The bridge spanned 200 feet. The exact length his own engineers calculated would require 72 hours minimum to rebuild. His engineering officer explained. "They're using prefabricated M2 treadway bridge sections, 25 feet long each, 8 pneumatic floats inflated in 12 minutes, 120 engineers working rotating shifts with portable floodlights powered by mobile generators. Sir, they worked through the night." Von Leutwitz checked the photo timestamp. 20:30 hours. Construction time, 4 hours and 15 minutes. He wrote in his war diary, "The Americans are not constrained by the same physical limitations we face. Their engineering capacity operates at industrial scale. We cannot delay them with destroyed infrastructure." But there was one more impossible thing the Germans didn't yet understand. December 21st. Cloud ceiling, 200 meters. Visibility, less than 2 kilometers. Weather conditions that should have grounded every aircraft in Europe. So why were American fighter bombers still filling the sky? 16:00 hours. Von Leutwitz's intelligence officer entered with a report marked urgent. He placed it on the desk without a word. Von Leutwitz read the first line, "American tactical air support operational despite weather conditions." He looked up sharply. "Impossible. No Air Force can operate in these conditions." His officer pointed to reconnaissance photos. "Sir, they've built 6 forward airstrips in the past week. Each one uses prefabricated steel matting. Construction time, 72 hours. They're positioned within 40 kilometers of the front lines." Von Leutwitz studied the photos. American P-47 Thunderbolts lined up on steel mat runways that hadn't existed 4 days earlier. He counted 18 aircraft in a single photograph. "They're using ground-based radar to guide aircraft through cloud cover," his officer continued. SCR 584 systems. Pilots receive targeting coordinates via radio from forward observers. They don't need visual contact until final approach. Von Leutwitz felt ice settle in his chest. "How many aircraft?" 1,200 P-47s assigned to IX Tactical Air Command. Current weather limits them to 400 sorties per day. The officer paused. When the weather clears, they can sustain 2,000 sorties per day. Each aircraft carries 2 500-pound bombs plus 8 rockets. Von Lutwitz looked at his operations map. Red circles marked every German panzer concentration around Bastogne. Every vehicle, every supply dump, every troop assembly area, all of it would be visible from the air the moment those clouds lifted. He wrote, "American air power is not weather-dependent. It is infrastructure-dependent, and they build infrastructure faster than we can destroy it. Our panzer forces are trapped in a killing zone. When weather clears, losses will be catastrophic." At 17:30 hours, confirmation arrived. American fighter bombers had destroyed 18 German tanks and 42 supply trucks in a single afternoon strike. The weather was still overcast. The Americans were flying anyway. December 22, 1944, 0200 hours, Kakot's command post. Kakot sat at his field desk, staring at numbers his staff had compiled over 48 hours. Every calculation pointed to the same devastating conclusion. The Americans were moving faster than German defensive doctrine could counter. His operations officer placed the final report on the desk. "Sir, American 4th Armored Division advance rate, 2.08 kilometers per hour sustained over 48 hours. German defensive doctrine assumes maximum enemy winter advance rate, 0.3 kilometers per hour." Kakot did the math on his notepad. The Americans were moving 7 times faster than German planning assumed possible. His logistics officer handed him another sheet. "Sir, to match American advance rate with our current capabilities, we would require 18 times more fuel delivery capacity, 6 times faster bridge construction, and air superiority we haven't possessed since 1943. Kakot studied the map. American forces, 6 kilometers south of Bastogne. At their current rate, 2.9 hours until contact with the 101st Airborne. He picked up the radio handset. "American armor will reach Bastogne perimeter by 0500 hours. Request permission to withdraw forces before we're trapped between the relief column and the defenders." Von Lutwitz's response came immediately. "Withdrawal denied. Hold current positions. Reinforcements are en route." Kakot slowly replaced the handset. There were no reinforcements. Von Lutwitz knew it. Kakot knew it. And in 2.9 hours, the siege of Bastogne would end. 0447 hours. 13 minutes ahead of Kakot's calculation. The first American Sherman tanks reached the 101st Airborne perimeter south of Bastogne. The siege was over. 05:15 hours. Kakot stood in the turret of his command half-track, binoculars raised, watching American tanks and paratroopers meet on the southern edge of town. He could see soldiers embracing, officers shaking hands, supply trucks already rolling into Bastogne. His operations officer climbed up beside him. "Sir, what are your orders?" Kakot lowered his binoculars. "Prepare defensive positions. The Americans will consolidate, then push outward. We need to establish a new perimeter before their air support becomes fully operational." But even as he gave the order, Kakot knew it was futile. The Americans had just proven they could move an armored division 100 miles in 48 hours, build bridges in 4 hours, fly close air support in weather that grounded the Luftwaffe. What Kakot didn't know, what no German commander fully grasped yet, was the scale of what was coming next. Within 24 hours of breaking the siege, American engineers had 3 bridges operational across the Sura River. Within 48 hours, Patton's Third Army concentrated 250,000 men and 40,000 vehicles around Bastogne. Within 72 hours, when the weather finally cleared, 2,000 American aircraft flew continuous missions over the Ardennes. The German offensive, the last major attack Germany could mount in the West, was effectively over. Not because of a single decisive battle, not because of superior tactics or braver soldiers, but because American logistics moved faster than German calculations said was possible. On December 26, 4 days after the relief of Bastogne, von Lutwitz wrote in his war diary, but what he wrote next would change how we understand modern warfare forever. American relief operation violated every principle of winter warfare we have studied. They moved an armored division at summer advance rates in December conditions. They built infrastructure faster than we could destroy it. They flew air support in weather we considered impossible for flight operations. This was not a failure of German tactics or courage. This was a collision between 2 different systems of warfare. Ours is limited by what horses, railroads, and scarce fuel can deliver. Theirs is powered by an industrial capacity that can move anything, anywhere, faster than our planning cycles can respond. We are not losing battles. We are losing to a production line. Years later, American officers described the relief of Bastogne as a triumph of Patton's aggressiveness and the 4th Armored Division's courage. German officers who were there remembered something different. Kakat, who survived the war and wrote extensively about the Ardennes offensive, described that moment when he saw those Sherman tanks approaching from the south. "I felt as if the rules of warfare had changed while I was fighting. We had calculated everything: fuel consumption, bridge construction time, weather limitations. The Americans ignored all of it. They didn't break the rules, they rewrote them." Von Lutwitz, in his post-war memoirs, was more direct. "At Bastogne, we learned that modern warfare is no longer decided by the general with the best tactics or the soldiers with the most courage. It is decided by the nation with the most trucks, the most fuel, and the most engineers who can build a bridge in 4 hours instead of 4 days." For the German panzer generals at Bastogne, the lesson was brutally simple. Courage, training, and tactical skill still mattered, but only inside the boundaries set by logistics. And in December 1944, American industry had pushed those boundaries so far that German calculations no longer worked. Think about what the Germans witnessed: 400,000 gallons of fuel delivered per day, 6 airstrips built in a week. An entire armored division moved 100 miles in 48 hours, something their best logisticians said was physically impossible. Patton's 100-mile dash to Bastogne didn't just save one town. It marked the moment when even the most hardened German commanders began to understand a terrible truth. They were no longer losing battles to better generals or braver soldiers. They were losing to a system that could outproduce, outbuild, and outdeliver anything Germany could field. They were losing to factories in Detroit, to oil fields in Texas, to engineers who could prefabricate a bridge section in a factory and assemble it under fire in 4 hours. They were losing to a production line. The relief of Bastogne proved that World War II was no longer won by generals and soldiers alone. It was won by the factories, the trucks, and the supply chains that could move an army 100 miles in 48 hours, something German logistics said was physically impossible. Want to see more stories of industrial warfare from the enemy perspective? Hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments which other World War II battle we should analyze through German eyes. Because sometimes, the most powerful weapon in war isn't on the battlefield at all. Sometimes, it's in the factory back home. Thanks for watching World War Mysteries.